In 1717, a king traded 600 living soldiers for 151 vases. Let that sink in for a second. Not gold, not land, not diamonds. Soldiers. Trained, armed, breathing men, exchanged for fragile pieces of white ceramic. If this sounds like madness to you, you're right. But by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why a European king thought this was the deal of a lifetime, and how one fragile vase quietly rewired the entire global economy. This is the story of Chinese porcelain, or as Europeans once called it in a mix of terror and desire, white gold. It's a story that has almost everything: a monarch's obsession that bankrupted a kingdom, a teenage alchemist locked in a tower and threatened with execution, a Catholic priest who became, quite possibly, history's first industrial spy, and an empire that guarded its greatest secret more fiercely than modern nations guard nuclear codes. The man behind that absurd trade of soldiers for vases was Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony, King of Poland, a man who could famously bend horseshoes with his bare hands and kept hundreds of mistresses. Powerful, feared, seemingly invincible. And yet he had one weakness he was disarmingly honest about. He called it, in his own words, maladie de porcelain, porcelain sickness. So how does the most powerful man in Saxony end up trading an entire regiment for a cabinet full of porcelain? To understand that, we can't stay in Europe. We have to cross the entire known world to an empire that had turned a formula of clay, water, and fire into the most closely guarded economic monopoly in human history. This is the untold history of porcelain. Before we go any further with Augustus and his vases, we need to answer one question. Why were Europeans so obsessed with Chinese porcelain in the first place? To understand that, let's try to feel that era. How did Western monarchs and aristocrats dine in the Middle Ages and the early modern period? Yes, their treasuries held gold and silver, but golden or silver tableware was heavy. It heated instantly, burning one's hands. It scratched easily and tarnished. And if you were not among the highest nobility, you ate from sturdy but heavy ceramics, from clay bowls that absorbed the smell of yesterday's soup, or from wooden boards. Tableware at Western courts was massive, practical, built for rough banquets, and entirely devoid of elegance. And then, along the Great Silk Road, and later on the ships of cunning Portuguese and Dutch merchants, something extraordinary began to arrive at these stern stone castles where monarchs were accustomed to steel and heavy gold. A miracle. Chinese porcelain. Imagine the shock of a Western aristocrat who picks up a Chinese bowl for the very first time. It is weightless. It is blindingly white. It produces a clear, crystalline ring when you tap it gently. And most striking of all, if you hold that cup up to a candle, it becomes translucent. Light passes through stone. For a nobleman of the 16th or 17th century, this was not merely tableware. It was magic. It was a technological wonder comparable to what we would feel if someone brought us a working fragment of an alien spacecraft. Western scholars could not comprehend what it was made of. The most fantastic theories flourished. The famous traveler Marco Polo, who incidentally brought the word porcellana to Europe, originally the name for a white seashell, wrote that the Chinese made their dishes from a special earth they dug up and left lying in the rain and wind for 40 years. According to him, grandfathers kneaded the clay so that grandchildren could shape it into a cup. Other researchers wrote in earnest that porcelain was made from pulverized lobster shells, ground eggshells, and fish scales. The Western nobility went mad. A single Chinese vase could fetch the price of an entire estate. Alchemists at the courts of various rulers spent years trying to crack the mystery of white gold, mixing glass, sand, bones, and shells. But what came out of their furnaces was either a murky glass that cracked at the touch of boiling water or coarse faience. The secret slipped away. And China said nothing, and coldly counted its staggering profits. The Chinese Empire held an absolute 100% global monopoly, and it guarded that monopoly more fiercely than nuclear launch codes are guarded today. So where exactly was this secret being kept? There was one city, one single place on Earth where the formula for white gold actually existed, and it was a place so dangerous for outsiders that almost no European had ever laid eyes on it. Let's go there next. Let us peer into the place where no foreigner, under pain of a gruesome death, was permitted to set foot. The city of Jingdezhen. In the mountains of southeastern China stood the unofficial porcelain capital of the world. It was a place that would astonish our imagination even today. Picture a colossal factory city. French Jesuit missionaries, who later managed to glimpse it from afar, described it like this. By day, it was hidden behind a dense cloud of black smoke. By night, the whole city appeared engulfed in flames, as though it were the mouth of a giant volcano. 3,000 kilns burned there simultaneously. 3,000! Day and night. The city never slept. More than 1 million people, an entire metropolis for those times, labored in a single, unceasing assembly line. Centuries before Henry Ford, the Chinese had perfected the division of labor to an absolute art. To produce a single porcelain cup, it had to pass through the hands of 70 different craftsmen. One man only dug the clay, another washed it, a third kneaded it, a fourth spun the potter's wheel, a fifth traced only the blue line on the rim, and a sixth painted only bamboo leaves. It was utterly industrial production in an age of deep traditionalism. But what was the secret they guarded so vigilantly? The secret of Chinese porcelain rested on two sacred ingredients. The Chinese poetically called them the bone and the flesh of porcelain. The flesh was petunse, porcelain stone, a mountain rock ground into the finest powder and formed into bricks. The bone was kaolin, a special white clay, remarkably heat-resistant. But even if a clever foreigner had miraculously obtained kaolin and petunse, nothing would have come of it, because there was a third, invisible ingredient: infernal temperature. The Chinese had learned to build enormous dragon kilns running up the slopes of hills. Thanks to natural draft, the fires reached 1,300 to 1,400 degrees Celsius, almost unattainable for Western technology of the time. At such temperatures, the clay did not melt, it fused, transforming into stone covered in a glassy glaze. The punishment for revealing this recipe to a foreigner in China was execution, not only of the culprit, but of his entire family. China's emperors understood the economics perfectly. As long as Western aristocracy was gripped by its mania for porcelain, rivers of silver flowed ceaselessly into the Celestial Empire. It was the perfect economic stranglehold, crafted by the genius of the East. Now, let's leave Jingdezhen and go back to Saxony, because while China guarded its secret with executions, one desperate king was about to lock a teenage boy in a tower and order him to invent the impossible.
And here we return to the domain of Augustus the Strong, the very king who traded soldiers for vases. His treasury is draining fast. His passion for porcelain is bankrupting the state. And the pragmatic Augustus understands, if he cannot buy all the Chinese porcelain in the world, he must make his own. In 1701, a young, brash, and, frankly, quite loose-lipped alchemist named Johann Friedrich Butger appeared in Saxony. He was barely 19 years old, and he had the imprudence to boast to acquaintances that he knew the secret of the Philosopher's Stone and could turn lead into gold. The rumors reached Augustus the Strong, and an ambitious king, suffering from a chronic deficit of funds, desperately needed gold. What does a ruler do? He acts harshly and decisively, orders the young alchemist seized and thrown into a dungeon. Butger becomes a state prisoner, the personal captive of a king. He is locked in Dresden's Jungfernbastei Castle, given a laboratory, guards, and a command: produce gold, or be hanged as a fraud. Imagine the terror of this 19-year-old boy. The years pass. He mixes, melts, experiments, poisoning himself with fumes of mercury and arsenic. He attempts escape several times. He is caught and brought back. No gold appears. The noose tightens. Then Augustus assigns him a supervisor, the scholar-physicist Count Ehrenfried Walter von Tschirnhaus. Tschirnhaus was a serious scientist, experimenting with high temperatures using enormous magnifying lenses to focus sunlight. The king changes the assignment. "Forget the gold," he says. "Make me white gold. Make me porcelain." And so begins a years-long, grinding scientific race inside a prison cell. They test hundreds, thousands of different clays. They fire their kilns until the stone walls glow red. Butger works himself to the bone, sleeping barely at all, his lungs scorched by toxic fumes. And then, in January 1708, a miracle occurs. From the kiln, they pull a shard that does not crack, does not darken, and rings. They find a deposit of kaolin nearby at Schneeberg. Butger cracks the formula. The Western world finally has its own porcelain. Soon, the first porcelain manufactory opens in Meissen, Saxony. A happy ending? Butger is showered with gold and set free? Not quite. Rulers know how to keep secrets. Since Butger knows the formula, he could sell it to rivals. The alchemist is moved to an even stricter prison, the Albrechtsberg Castle. Above the door of his laboratory, an inscription is carved: "Secret unto the grave." Butger, who had given the Saxon crown its greatest technological wonder, drank himself into ruin in his golden cage, and died at the age of 37, sick, half-blind, and utterly broken. Such was the price one man paid for a beautiful white vase. But even Meissen porcelain did not answer all the questions. The Saxons had discovered the material, but they did not understand China's techniques of mass production. They did not know the secrets of Chinese pigments, especially the famous cobalt blue that would not burn out in the kilns. Meissen was an expensive, bespoke luxury. Cunning merchants and rulers of other great powers wanted to produce porcelain by the millions. They needed something Butger never had, an actual, first-hand account of how the Chinese did it. They needed a brilliant, educated, and audacious industrial spy. And one was found, in the last place anyone would have expected. Not in a palace, not in a guild of merchants, in the ranks of the Catholic Church. In the early 18th century, the Jesuits arrived in China. The Society of Jesus, the intellectual elite of the Catholic Church. Their official purpose? To bring the light of Christianity to the East. But the Jesuits were skilled strategists. They understood that preaching on the streets of China was useless. One had to win the trust of the elite. They brought the emperor clocks, telescopes, astronomical charts. Emperor Kangxi was charmed by these deeply educated men, and he allowed them to live in China. One such missionary was a Frenchman, François-Xavier d'Entrecoll, who in China took the name Bai Jin. A man of extraordinary intellect, keen observation, and, as history would reveal, a fantastically sharp instinct for espionage. Father d'Entrecoll received his posting to Jiangxi province, the very province where the forbidden city of Jingdezhen lay. The Jesuit began his delicate, years-long game. He spent years preaching among the workers of the porcelain manufactories. He treated their ailments, dispensed medicines, heard their confessions. The Chinese are a reserved people, but kind words and genuine help do their work. The workers began to trust the good priest. And the priest, in passing, began to ask questions, innocent-seeming questions. "Oh, my son, what wonderful clay! Where do you find it? How many days do you dry these forms? What do you add to this blue pigment to make it burn so brightly?" But d'Entrecoll did not merely listen. He penetrated the factories themselves. Under the guise of spiritual visits, he walked among the glowing kilns, his sharp mind recording their structure, studying the tools, observing the techniques. And then, on the 1st of September, 1712, Father d'Entrecoll sat down at his desk in his modest cell, took a quill, and wrote a letter to Paris, to his superior, Father Horry. That letter is one of the most important documents in the history of world industry. It is not a theological treatise. It is a meticulous, dozen-page instruction manual for porcelain production. D'Entrecoll describes everything: the precise proportions of kaolin and petunza, the design of the dragon kilns, the secrets of glazing, the firing process, the composition of the cobalt pigment. Moreover, he secretly enclosed physical samples of kaolin itself. 10 years later, in 1722, he sent a second letter revealing even finer secrets. For instance, how the Chinese produce porcelain with rice grain windows, translucent spots in the walls of a cup, or how they simulate the noble crackle of ancient porcelain. These two letters were published in France. The effect was that of an intellectual bomb going off. Pause for a moment on the ethics of this act. A man of God who came to save souls carried out a sophisticated, calculating operation to extract the greatest economic secret from a country that had sheltered him. Did he justify it as being in the service of his nation and of science? Undoubtedly. But the historical fact remains. The Chinese state monopoly, protected for 1,000 years, guarded with execution as its punishment, was brilliantly unlocked, not by an army, not by a spy in the shadows, but by the quiet, patient quill of one Catholic priest. And once those letters reached Europe, the balance of an entire global industry began to tip. Once d'Entrecoll's letters reached the hands of Western scholars and monarchs, everything changed. Porcelain factories began springing up across Europe like mushrooms after rain. In France, the Sèvres manufactory blossomed under the patronage of Madame de Pompadour, inventing new colors: rose pompadour, sky blue. Porcelain became an instrument of French diplomacy. In England, Josiah Wedgwood carried out another revolution. He automated the process, cut costs, and began mass production of porcelain affordable not only to lords, but to prosperous townspeople. The British even invented bone china, porcelain strengthened with calcined cow bones,
making it yet stronger and finer. And what of China? The Western powers, having secured the recipe, no longer wished to pay silver for Chinese goods. Demand collapsed. The kilns of Jingdezhen began to cool. Of course, great trading companies still carried Chinese porcelain in their holds, but now cunning Western merchants began to dictate terms. They sent their own design sketches to China. Imagine the humiliation of a great civilization, Chinese craftsmen, heirs to a 1,000-year tradition, forced to paint foreign coats of arms, English fox hunting scenes, and portraits of unfamiliar lords onto their vases, just to sell something. This porcelain was dismissively called chine de commande, made to order China. The monopoly that had once been guarded with executions, that had once made kings trade regiments of soldiers for a handful of vases, had fallen. The secret had been elegantly, ruthlessly extracted, mastered, and surpassed. So what does all of this actually mean for us today, centuries later? Let's bring it back to something you can hold in your own hand.
Today, when you walk into your kitchen to pour your morning coffee or tea, you reach for a mug. It is most likely made of porcelain or earthenware. It costs next to nothing. If it breaks, you will simply sweep up the shards and buy another. But I ask you, the next time you wrap your hand around it, linger for just a moment on its smooth, white surface. Feel its coolness. In this simple cup, which we no longer even notice in the bustle of our days, an extraordinary story lies hidden. In it, the smoke of 3,000 kilns in great Jingdezhen and the artistry of millions of nameless Chinese craftsmen. In it, the iron will of King Augustus, who was prepared to sell the lives of his soldiers for beautiful vases. In it, the despair of the young alchemist Butger, choking in a Dresden prison. In it, the cunning and genius of Father d'Entrecolle, who, beneath the mask of piety, seized the greatest secret of the East. The history of humanity is not only a list of battle dates and the names of generals. Sometimes the history of the world fits on the bottom of a small, fragile, snow-white cup. A thing that was killed for, that ruined nations, and that, in the end, bound East and West together with an invisible but unbreakable thread of intrigue and discovery. This has been the Gilded Archives, and we have only just begun to carefully peel back the gilt from official world history, to see beneath it the faces of living people. Subscribe to the channel. Be sure to leave a comment. Did you know that the history of your ordinary household crockery could be so multifaceted, so brutal, and so genuinely full of espionage? Until we meet again, and do enjoy your cup of tea.